This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews, or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
If your business runs on 5 different apps, 12 browser tabs, and one spreadsheet that everyone's afraid to touch, it's probably time for Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that connects every part of your business into one powerful, easy-to-use platform. So instead of wasting time switching between disconnected systems, your entire business works together in real time. Your team moves faster, your data stays accurate, and you can actually focus on growing your business. Let one unified system run your entire business. From the first opportunity to the final payment, everything works together in one place. Whether you're a small business or managing a large operation, Odoo gives you the flexible platform built to grow with you. Try it today for free at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is The Fall Line. For the past decade, Nina Innsted has been one of the most dedicated advocates for Michigan's cold cases. You may know her from Already Gone. That's her podcast focused on cases from the Great Lakes region. She's written, produced, and hosted that show for years, and she's an Ambie Award winner to boot. And now, Nina has taken her work into print. Her new book, Unsolved Michigan, is published with History Press, and it documents cases from the 70s and 80s that have never been resolved, organized into 3 sections: the murdered, the missing, and the dig. Nina is a credentialed victims advocate, and that background informs every aspect of how she approaches Unsolved Michigan, from the archival research process to the way she writes about families who are still waiting for answers. The book covers homicide victims whose cases contain specific investigative failures, missing persons whose disappearances are tied to particular geographic and social vulnerabilities, and the 2018 and 2022 forensic excavations in Macomb County. This focus makes sense. Beyond the podcast, Nina is also a longtime leadership volunteer from Missing in Michigan, an organization dedicated to keeping these cases visible. She began as their media coordinator, and she's now serving as the organization's president. Through that work, she's helped connect families and law enforcement, generate public momentum, and push for legislation. We sat down to talk about her book, research, the cases, and what Nina hopes that her work will accomplish for Michigan's missing and murdered. While we're discussing Nina's book in the same order that she laid it out, please know this is just an overview. There are more cases covered than we have the space to discuss in a single episode, and she gets into much more detail, particularly regarding her work with the families that she spoke with, her archival research, and even new information she was able to bring to law enforcement. So, Nina, you have spent a decade telling stories via audio. I would love for you to talk about what the medium of a book allows you to explore regarding Michigan's history that just didn't quite fit or suit a podcast.
Well, I've always wanted to write a book. Like my whole life, I've wanted to be a writer, and writing for the podcast was very satisfying, but there's something maybe a little more satisfying about having it come out in a book. You get to see places and people and spaces that you don't always get in a podcast unless you go looking. So I was excited to present some of the pictures and places that are featured in these stories in the book.
And I think that also kind of speaks to the press that you picked to publish your book with. which focuses on regional history. That's History Press. Can you talk about whether or not that requirement made you shape your book differently? Because I kind of think you're going to say it just perfectly suited what you wanted to do anyway, but I want to give you a chance to answer that.
The History Press encourages the use of pictures in setting a story. So I was excited to get to include these images and had to outsource a couple of the images from the Paul Gerard case, which took place way up in the northern part of Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. I found a student who's the daughter of a friend that was super excited to be part of the storytelling by capturing those images for me. And I felt like it was important to people who may not be familiar with the area to see these pictures and these images of where things took place.
So you mentioned some of your archival research, but I'd love for you to talk about a few of the most challenging investigative documents or archival documents, records that you had to hunt down to complete the narrative for these cases.
Some of the cases, being that they're open and still considered under investigation, it's really difficult to get law enforcement to share those documents with you, as you well know. But I was very fortunate in that law enforcement, when they found out that I was doing a book featuring their unsolved case, were by and large very helpful. One of the cases, I don't want to say which one, I was invited to the department to go through photos and part of the file, which I thought was exceedingly generous on the part of the detective assigned to the case.
You are a credentialed victims advocate, which is still something that's comparatively rare in our field. And I wonder how that professional role both helped you interface with law enforcement and professionals when you were seeking this out, and perhaps even influenced which cases you might have chosen to include.
One of the things that I'm most proud of about this book is that in all but 3 cases, I was working with a family member or a friend of the deceased. And when you go to law enforcement and say, look, I'm working with the sister, I'm working with the daughter, they're more likely, at least in my experience, to be open-handed with you when they know that, look, this has the support of the family.
When I hear that, I also begin to think about not only the cases that you chose, which we will get into, but also the structure of your book, which is one of my favorite things about it.
I wanted people to have a choice in what they were going to consume, because some people don't like unsolved murders. Some people don't like missing persons cases. Some people may not be familiar with the dig and all that that entailed when it happened in Macomb County a few years ago. So it was important for me, when thinking about the person who would be consuming the book, to understand this is what you're getting into with what you're reading, and this is the status of the case. These cases are unsolved murders, these cases are missing persons, and these cases are attached to this law enforcement event that took place almost 10 years ago now, but still has shaped the way their case is investigated, how the case is approached.
The first case that Nina walked us through involves Gregory McRoberts, a young father who vanished in December of 1991.
Well, Gregory was a young father who had a pregnant girlfriend and a toddler-aged daughter when he vanished in December. His remains would not be found until January, and it appeared very clearly that he had been the victim of a hit and run. And unfortunately, his death sparked a lot of discussion, not about who killed him, but about the circumstances of his death. His body was found in a ditch, and people theorized that he could not have been in that ditch for the weeks that he was missing. So there ended up being this whole almost cottage industry of people speculating about who hit him and how they must have kept him in a barn somewhere or in a shed, and then later returned him to the ditch. And it caused a lot of chaos for law enforcement, because people weren't calling in going, oh, I think this person hit him, or I think that person hit him. It was, this person has a barn, you should see if he was kept in that barn, or this person has a shed, you should see if he was kept in that shed. So it was a very strange case at the time that it happened, because there was all this unfounded speculation about the circumstances of his demise. When I was able to talk with law enforcement and look at some of the photos associated with his case, Greg was killed almost instantly. And it appears that he was in that ditch the whole time. Now, Years after his death, his parents received a letter from someone who claimed to be the person that struck Greg. And this person gave all sorts of information that they were in recovery, that they had a brother, that they vacationed in, I believe it was Minnesota. But they did not give their name, but they did offer an apology for their role in Greg's death. Now, I recently learned since the book has come out that Greg's daughter, who was a toddler when her father was killed, they've been doing genetic genealogy on the DNA from the envelope that the letter came in. And they tracked down a third cousin of the person who wrote the letter. And Greg's daughter was able to sit down and break bread with this cousin of the person who potentially killed her father. Now, we still haven't identified the letter writer, but we've gotten much closer.
And of course, with the advances of IgG, that could be very possible.
Yes. So just a very exciting development. I really hope this is moving in the right direction.
Another case covered in Michigan Unsolved focuses on Paul Gerard, a Marquette resident who was lured to Isle Royale State Park and stabbed to death in 1988. Nina had already covered Paul's story through Already Gone, but the book allowed her to go considerably deeper.
So Paul Gerard lived in northern Michigan, and I have to look because I don't remember off the top of my head which town he lived in. I think it was Marquette. And Marquette is a college town. And in the 80s, just like today, Marquette's population fluctuates greatly when school is in and when school is out. When school is in, the population jumps way up by thousands, and when school is out, the population plummets. But Paul had grown up not too far from Marquette and lived in the area. Paul worked as a small machine repairman and lived modestly. He had an apartment, he drove a late model car, and he was also an openly gay man, which in the 80s in northern Michigan was unheard of. You didn't do that. It didn't happen. Now, we all know that the gay community was there and existed, but usually at that time it was kept under wraps or kept quiet. But Paul was open about who he was and what he did and how he lived his life, which cost him some friends and some relationships, unfortunately. He was lured out to Isle Royale State Park for some sort of conversation, interaction, for something. And when he was at this remote park during the cold weather, he was stabbed to death. And his killer or killers are still unknown and walking free. So in the 80s, at the time this happened, I believe it was 1988, there wasn't such a thing as a hate crime. Hate crime legislation would not come out for a few years, but there were gay rights activists who spoke out at the time and said, look, he was killed because he was a gay man. They were using the term hate crime then, even though it wasn't in the broader lexicon at the time. Advocates were absolutely speaking out on Paul's behalf and pushing for a better investigation. From what I could tell, Marquette police did a solid investigation. They did everything that they were supposed to do.
As many listeners know, I'm from Atlanta, and it's already very hot here. Summer just isn't a vacation when you have meetings to attend and conferences to speak at, and a lot of occasions when you have to look good no matter what the weather is like. That's why I love Quince. I can buy clothes that are lightweight, comfortable, and that look amazing no matter where I'm headed. I actually just got a really cute pair of Ponte cargo pants that are dressy enough for professional meetings, but relaxed enough that I can wear them morning until night. Quince has so many gorgeous everyday pieces, including 100% European linen tops, pants, and dresses. And with styles that start at just $32, you can complete your summer wardrobe. After all, everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. And you can buy a lot more than just clothes with Quince. In fact, you can elevate just about everything: bedding, housewares, and much more, all in one place. And since Quince works directly with ethical factories, you'll feel good about what you're buying too. I know I do. In fact, I've already picked out my next purchase, an organic, textured cotton peasant blouse that will get me through this heat in style. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/fallline for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/fallline for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/fallline. I've sought out therapy at a few different points in my life, usually when I'm looking at some kind of crossroads, like a career shift or a big life change. And every time, it has made a real difference. The hard part was never deciding to go. It was finding someone who was the right fit and who took my insurance, which never made sense to me. You use insurance for your physical health without any hesitation, so why should mental health be any different? That's why I want to tell you about Rula. Rula partners with over 100 insurance plans, bringing the average copay down to just $15 a session, and depending on your benefits, it can be as low as $0. That gets you a nationwide network of over 15,000 licensed therapists and psychiatrists accepting new patients right now. Here's what's great about Rula. It takes the time to match you with providers who fit your goals, your background, and what you're looking for, all carefully screened and vetted. No endless wait list either. Appointments are available as soon as tomorrow. And Rula stays with you, checking in to make sure you're making real progress toward your goals. Thousands of people are already using Rula to get high-quality therapy that's genuinely covered by insurance. Visit Rula.com/fallline to get started. That's RULA.com/fallline. You deserve mental health care that works with you, not against your budget. Again, that's RULA.com/fallline. Then there's the tragic death of Valerie Bishop. Her murder, a crime that received almost no press attention, was one of the very first issues Nina and I ever discussed. She's always been frustrated by both public and private treatment of Valerie's case, particularly considering that she disappeared and was later found dead at the height of the Detroit area's focus on missing and murdered children.
So Valerie's case is both equal parts frustrating and heartbreaking. Valerie was the oldest daughter of 6 children. She had 4 brothers and 1 sister, and it's her sister Kimberly that I worked with to put her chapter together, and Kimberly who really carries the torch for her case. And what I learned is that they had a suspect in 1977 when she was killed, but a judge dismissed the case against him for a lack of evidence. And I have been told by sources in the Detroit Police Department that that evidence still exists, has not been tested, and the main suspect at the time who had the case against him dismissed is still alive and still living in the Detroit area. It bothers me so much that her case is languishing when there's evidence, and I even offered to privately pay to have the evidence tested. The gentleman, I use the term gentleman loosely, the gentleman who is the main suspect was wearing pants with bloodstains on them when he was taken into custody. And the bloodstains were type O, which is the most common type, which is also Valerie's blood type. But they've never done any testing to confirm who the blood belonged to. Valerie lived in Detroit. I believe it was on Aurora Street in a, working class neighborhood in the city. And at the time that she was murdered, Oakland County, which is at the time was a predominantly white suburb, had a series of child killings taking place where 8 white children had been murdered in a 15-month period. And when Valerie's body was found, just like the Oakland County child killer victims, in the snow on the side of the road, the head of the Oakland County task force went, nope, that's not one of ours, and just dismissed her case as not being related to the Oakland County child killers because she was not a white child living in Oakland County. So her case missed out on all of the extra resources that the task force had.
And as the person, to my knowledge, who has most extensively covered these cases, the Oakland County child murders, is your impression that Valerie's case is part of that sequence?
It is not. I do not believe that her case is an Oakland County child killer case. However, it is tremendously frustrating for them to do zero investigation, zero effort, and just dismiss her case as not being involved. It was a child murder at the time that we were going through an epidemic of child murders. If her case had been given a modicum of attention, it would likely be solved.
Nina also told me about Deborah Rentschler, whose cold case homicide is also covered in Unsolved, Michigan. It's a case that has always haunted her. Deborah was a young woman whose body was found in a Farmington snowbank in December of 1980, and there are still questions about the investigation into her murder.
Deborah had a very difficult life. Her mother died when she was very young, perhaps 5 years old. She was shuttled between different family members. She wasn't given a lot of guidance or direction on how to process her very understandable grief over the loss of a parent. She finally aged out of care and was 18 years old and living in some flop house of a motel in the city of Detroit. She had a boyfriend who was technically her pimp that made sure that she had food and a roof over her head, but that was about the extent of his care for Deborah. And one evening right before Christmas in 1980, she walked out of the motel that she was living in, and it was a snowy night, and she got into a car with someone, we're assuming. And her body would be found the next day in the snow, naked, out in Farmington, a good 20 miles from where she was living. So someone must have picked her up and transported her all of this distance. Her body was just dumped in a snowbank next to an office building. And Farmington police were notified of the body being there. They worked the scene, did what they were supposed to do. Oakland County Medical Examiner came and picked her up. And then on the day after Christmas, the 26th, Dr. Robert Sillery, who was the medical examiner, who had all sorts of issues, all sorts of problems. He worked on the Oakland County child killer case. He was known for not being a diligent medical examiner. He was known for not doing a good job. And he took one look at Deborah's body, which had been found naked in a snowbank 20 miles from her home, and marked her death natural causes. She was buried, labeled natural causes. So the police are like, wait a minute, wait. You're telling me that this girl who was found naked in a snowbank 20 miles from home died of natural causes? And they were like, yep. So Farmington police had to fight to get her exhumed and re-autopsied. And when she was re-autopsied, they discovered ligature marks on her neck. She had been murdered, which they assumed all along based on how she was found. And the investigation proceeded, but there was very little evidence to work on. You know, she wasn't wearing fancy jewelry that could have been pawned. She didn't have credit cards that could have been stolen. Her personal belongings found with her body were meager. And my understanding is they have since been disposed of. They're no longer in evidence. So this poor girl who had such a difficult life then had to have such a difficult death and was not treated with respect even after she was murdered. When I initially looked into Deborah's case, I sat down with the chief of police in Farmington, and I say chief of police, he's actually the director of public safety because they have a public safety department, and he was incredibly candid, incredibly open-handed. He's like, look, I want this solved. I don't like that our town has an unsolved murder. I've done everything possible to try and resolve her case. And then that was when I covered her case on the podcast. And then when I decided to include her in the book because she deserves any attention that she can get for her case, I spoke with the new director of public safety who said, look, we have done everything. We've exhausted every lead. We didn't have a lot to work with in the beginning. We were behind the 8 ball because of how her body was treated after she went to the medical examiner's office. But they truly have done everything that they could considering the limited evidence available in her case because it was not processed properly from the get-go. And I will tell you that Dr. Sillery ended up losing his job at the medical examiner's office, not because of Deborah, although he should have lost his job because of what he did to her, He did end up separating from the medical examiner's office and got into some legal trouble with Medicare or Medicaid in the years after he was let go.
The final unsolved homicide case covered in Nina's book is the death of Eddie Holman.
So Eddie Holman was kind of the boy next door. He grew up in Dearborn Heights. He played football and I think he wrestled. He liked playing ice hockey on a pickup team. He, after high school, went out to Oklahoma because he wanted to be a pilot. So he moved out to Oklahoma with his girlfriend, Mara, and they lived in an apartment while he did his flight training in Oklahoma. And when he moved back to Michigan after completing his flight training, he and Mara broke things off, but remained in contact. And he moved back in with his parents. Now, Eddie was the youngest of 4 kids, but he was his dad's only child. His dad, Ted, only had Eddie. His mom had 3 older half-siblings. He was, let me think for a second. In May of 1992, he was not in college, but all of his friends still were in college. He drove up to Central Michigan University for the weekend to hang out with some of his friends on a Friday night. Then he came back on Saturday, went to a party, very normal early 20s stuff that kids do. And he came home around 3 or 4 in the morning on Sunday. And instead of going into his bedroom to sleep, he went downstairs into the sort of thrown together family room in the basement. There was a couch, there was a rug, there was a TV. And that's where he decided he was going to sleep that night. And that was not unusual. If Eddie had been out late, he would often go downstairs to sleep. Well, Sunday morning rolls around and his mom and dad decide that they're going to go to early mass at 8 a.m. and leave Eddie sleeping it off downstairs. When they come back from mass, mom goes downstairs to check on some stuff in the basement and discovers that someone has strangled Eddie with a pair of pants and left his body on the floor. Eddie's mom calls the police. They come to the scene and they're not sure if this is a homicide or a suicide because the pants are wrapped around Eddie's neck. They're looking for a place that the pants could have been hung up for him to hang himself, but they can't find one. So they have the medical examiner come to the scene to make a determination. Is this a homicide or is this a situation of self-harm? The medical examiner determines that Eddie died by violence. This is a homicide. They need to do a full investigation, and they do. They tow Eddie's car. They roll up the carpet from the basement. They take the pants into evidence. They do a full autopsy on Eddie. He's got abrasions on his face and on the back of his head where someone struck him, and he has died by strangulation. But someone had to know that Eddie would be home alone that Sunday morning while his parents were at mass. I think that someone would have to know the Holman family's routine, that the parents went to mass on Sundays. They may have to have had a key to get into the house. Ted can't remember if he locked the door behind him. So he thinks he did. So how did the person get into the house to get access to Eddie?
The second section of Unsolved Michigan provides in-depth coverage of some of the state's coldest missing persons cases. Nina walked us through some of those details.
Each case is unique, and some cases they leave a big footprint, and other cases don't. The case of Kim King, which I discuss in the book, she crawled out a friend's window and was never seen again. But we don't know where she went missing from, so we have no crime scene to start from. But if you look at the case of Bernice Gray, her car was found with bloodstains in it, which gives you a big footprint to work around. Bernice's case has actually been prosecuted. The question is, where is Bernice? She is still missing, even though someone has been prosecuted and sent to prison for her murder. There's still a big unanswered question there. Whereas with Kim's case, no one's been prosecuted. They think they could maybe possibly have a suspect, but they're not entirely sure.
Unsolved Michigan also covers the 1990 disappearance of Connie Royce, a young woman from Mount Clemens.
So Connie was in her early 20s. She was somewhat recently divorced and was out on the dating scene. She had moved back in with her parents. Now, I need to mention that Connie was a much younger child. She had older siblings. When she was in her 20s, her older siblings were in their late 30s or early 40s. So Connie is in her early 20s. She has a date with this gentleman that she'd met, and she goes to his apartment to meet up with one of his friends and him, and they do a little pre-gaming. They have a couple of drinks, and then they head out to the Hayloft in Mount Clemens, which is a really happening bar. And one of the really interesting things about the Hayloft back in 1990 is that they had video cameras at the entrance. So you can go online and see video of Connie entering the bar, and you can see video of her exiting the bar. So she's at this bar with these two guys, one of whom she likes and she's on a date with. And he gets up and goes to the restroom, and she turns to the other man that he's with and says, "I can't do this." And she gets up and walks out of the bar, just leaves. She doesn't run out. She doesn't storm out. She just walks away. And there's video of her as she leaves, and she's a little unsteady on her feet and sort of clips her shoulder on the corner of the wall as she goes. And that's the last time anyone sees her. The valet didn't see her leave. The doorman didn't see her leave. Nobody knows what's happened to her. Her date comes back to the table and is like, "Where's Connie?" And the guy that he's with says, she just left. She got up and walked out. So they go looking for her, and we have them on video. So we know they're not involved in her disappearance because they didn't leave the bar except to walk out to the doorman and say, where did Connie go? Have you seen her? And then walk back in saying, "Well, we'll wait." And I believe she left some of her personal items behind at the bar. But Connie was gone and has never been seen again, except maybe a possible sighting at a payphone outside of a busy pizzeria, the local takeout pizza place on a Friday night or Saturday night. They may have seen her using the payphone out on the street in front of their business, but we have no idea. And now Mount Clemens is also on the water. So there were some areas that she could have potentially gone into the water, but those areas were searched.
So you already mentioned one case where we see a conviction, but no person recovered. And there's one more that I want to touch on, and that's the case of Carly Morse.
Yes. Carly was a 16-year-old girl who stepped out to get some air one night from the apartment she shared with her mother and disappeared. Her mother did not know that she'd made plans to meet up with a couple of older teenage boys that she was friends with. Her mom looked for her all over, all the time, fought really hard for her case, called the FBI when she didn't think that Westland was doing what Westland needed to do to investigate Carly's disappearance. The FBI confirmed that Westland was doing everything they needed to do, and it ended up being a young girl who was dating one of the boys that Carly went out with that night who broke the case open. And Carly's case does have resolution in that her killers are in prison and they're going to remain in prison for a long time. But Carly has never been found. There's never been any sight or sign of her in decades.
I'm Serena Williams, and I'm healthier on Ro. I've lost 34 pounds in a year with GLP-1s, diet, and exercise. On Ro, you can access GLP-1 options, including the first FDA-approved GLP-1 pill for weight loss. Go to ro.co/journey to see if you qualify. 14 to 20% average weight loss in 1 year in non-diabetics with obesity or overweight with a weight-related medical condition versus 2.2% to 3.1% in placebo arm. RX only. To stay informed about serious side effects, go to ro.co/safety.
So, one of the most interesting parts of the book to me, just as someone who has had the experience, was you writing about an excavation that happened in Macomb County. And I know that there's some differences there. I was able to be present for an excavation. You were able to get details afterward. But I would love for you to talk to us about why that excavation occurred and perhaps the thematic links between the cases that were involved.
So the dig actually goes back to 1985 when a girl named Cindy Zarzicki disappeared from East Point, Michigan. I think at the time it was called East Detroit, but now we know it as East Point. And she was sweet on this boy named Scott Ream. And she thought that she was going to Scott Ream's birthday party. But it turned out that she was being picked up by Arthur Ream, the father of Scott, and taken to his warehouse, where some very difficult things happened, and Cindy was murdered, and her body was buried. We didn't find this out until 2008, but her body was buried at this property in Macomb County. Now, Cindy's case was not properly investigated, because if it had been properly investigated, they would have figured out in 1985 or maybe 1986 that she was seeing Scott Ream, whose father was a known pervert who had done time in prison for harming girls. But somehow this missed their attention, and it wouldn't be until 2007 that the case was dusted off again and looked at. And they figured out that, hey, Scott Ream, we need to talk to him. Well, initially, when they wanted to talk to Scott Ream, it was right before the 4th of July, and he ended up dying in a car accident over the 4th of July. So he never got to have that meeting with law enforcement. His father, however, was in and out of prison on other charges. When they eventually put 2 and 2 together and figured out that they needed to go after Arthur Ream for her case, they were able to prosecute him for her murder without a body. And then the investigators were able to persuade him to lead them to her body once he was prosecuted. And he took them out to this property in northern Macomb County, a place where he used to keep bees. He knew the people that owned the property. He used to hunt up there. He kept bees. He spent time up there, and that was where Cindy was buried. They were able to exhume Cindy and bring her home to her family after, 20 some years. And when the Kimberly King case, which we talked about briefly earlier, when that case started to heat up again, they looked at Art Ream and thought, well, if he buried Cindy Zarzicki on this property, maybe he buried Kim King. Maybe he was involved in the disappearance of Kelly Brownlee. Maybe he was involved in the disappearance of Kim Laro. Maybe he was involved in the disappearance of a couple of other girls who are not covered in the book. We're going to dig up this property. And they brought in the Michigan State Police, the FBI, the Macomb County Sheriff, the Warren Police, like all of these different agencies descended on this huge piece of property, multiple acres. And they brought in cadaver dogs, they brought in backhoes, and they just started tearing up this undeveloped property, trying to find human remains. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything. So I covered Kimberly King's case on the podcast in 2017 or 2018, and Kim's father had a criminal record, and he had served some time behind bars. And one of his buddies that he had served time with was a guy named Arch. Now, if you're familiar with the Oakland County child killer case, which we also talked about earlier, there's a man involved in that case named Arch Sloan. And when law enforcement listened to my coverage of the Kim King case, they went, wait a minute, what if the Arch that her dad was friends with was Arch Sloan? We need to pull out Kim King's case file and look again. And it led to them reopening Kim's case, which culminated in the dig.
Although that dig was unsuccessful, are you hopeful, especially based on more modern forensics?
So I go back and forth on being hopeful. Unfortunately, Art Ream died in prison about 2 years ago. So there's no one left to prosecute or question, at least in his instance. So it concerns me that law enforcement may have put all their eggs in his basket and are like, well, he's dead. There's nothing we can do. I am hopeful that there will be a development on that property because it's in a nice area of Macomb County at the north end. I'm hopeful that someone will develop it and that more evidence will be uncovered with development of the area.
Nina's work with families and in support of their cases doesn't end with her book or her podcast coverage. She and retired Michigan State Police Inspector Sarah Krebs have collaborated for years through Missing in Michigan. And as we told you, Nina recently stepped into the role of president. Nina told us that the partnership with Inspector Krebs has informed how she approaches case files, FOIA documents, and how she treats the line between conjecture and actionable evidence.
So working with retired Inspector Krebs has been amazing. I've learned so much from her in terms of operating Missing in Michigan, working with families, providing resources to families, which is something that Missing in Michigan strives to do, is to be a resource for families of both short-term and long-term missing. But it's also been an education for me because when I started my relationship with Missing in Michigan back in 2018, I was looking for cases to cover. I was, a very green writer, researcher, podcast host who just wanted a good story to share with my listeners. And I have, I believe, grown and changed so much. And much of that came from Sarah's direction and her guidance in how to handle these cases, how to work with families, how to treat families and their missing loved one with the respect that they deserve. And it's really been quite a transformation over the last almost 10 years that I've been working with Missing in Michigan.
I would love for you to just briefly mention what Missing in Michigan can do for families in the area.
So one of the things that I've started in the last calendar year is we've started doing quarterly family meetings where we go to different parts of the state and invite families of the missing to come and work with other families of the missing. Because as understanding or sympathetic as you may be or I may be, we don't get what they're going through. They need to talk with other people who are in their same situation. And I'm giving them the opportunity to do that and to be in that with someone else who's in the club that they are in, having a missing loved one, be it short-term or long-term. And I think that the short-term families can learn a lot from the long-term families and vice versa. Each May, we do a day of the missing where we invite families from all over the state to come to our host location, which is Madonna University. And they get to spend the morning together. They get to have lunch together. And then Missing in Michigan does our awards and also gives them the opportunity to talk with law enforcement and to talk with the media and get additional coverage for their missing loved one's case. We do that at each of the family meetings as well. And it was really great to see, people who have a long-term missing, someone that's been gone 30, 35 years, and someone that's been missing for 3 months. And they're both getting time and attention from the local media for their case. It is much needed. And it's good for them to get that practice of speaking to the media and advocating for their missing loved one.
Is there something that you wish general audiences who receive this information knew or understood about missing persons cases that they just don't quite get yet or that you don't see discussed?
So one of my great frustrations is dealing with runaways. Because a child is a runaway, I see frequently dismissive comments. Well, they'll be back. They'll come home when they're ready. And it's like, wait a minute. We know that teenagers don't have fully developed brains. We know that if they've run away, they're not making great choices. There's a likelihood that this child is not safe. A runaway deserves immediate attention, immediate response, and it deserves to be taken seriously. And I just would love to see people, instead of being dismissive of a runaway case, is, well, they'll come home. Well, but in the meanwhile, they could be in danger, and this could shift from a runaway to an endangered missing case in the blink of an eye. We have to look for these kids. We have to take these missing teenagers seriously.
For a while now, you've also been a credentialed victims advocate. Did that experience, that role, that responsibility for you shape the way that you wrote your book in ways that it perhaps might not have before you had all those experiences?
Absolutely. I said just a few minutes ago, I was looking for a good story. I was looking for an interesting story. And now I know that each story deserves attention. Each story deserves respect. Each victim is unique and special and deserves to be treated as such. I was also talking with families and doing things that I really wasn't fully prepared to do. And now that I've had this training, I feel better prepared to work with families, better prepared to serve families and be there for them and hold space when they need it. And, it's even colored the language that I use when I speak with families or with the media.
I asked Nina where listeners and interested readers can find out more, and maybe even meet her this summer.
So I'm going to be at Schoolcraft College in the city of Livonia in July on the 31st, teaching a class called Unsolved Michigan, Missing Persons and Cold Cases. So that is really my only event that I'll be doing over the summer. And then as we get into the fall, I will be back at libraries all across Michigan, Milford, Novi, Livonia, even some outstate stuff. But I've been posting my calendar of events on my social media. So if you follow me on Instagram or on Threads, you will likely come across where I'm going to be in the weeks ahead.
Be sure to pick up Unsolved Michigan. It's available now wherever you get your books and through your local library. I have a copy, and it is empathetic, detailed, and overall just a really amazing read. If you're not already a listener of Already Gone, Nina's podcast that covers cold cases from the Great Lakes region, you have a great back catalog waiting for you. Links to both are in the show notes. Up next for the fall line, our summer schedule begins. That's when we take time to highlight cases that most need renewed attention. If you know of a case that should be covered on the fall line, there's a link to our case submissions form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIAs, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. Our therapy fund is paid for through Patreon and Apple Premium subscriptions. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcast, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, is out everywhere. Find out more through the link in our show notes. The Fall Line is created by Laura Norton and Brooke Hargrove. The show is written, hosted, researched, and produced by Laura Norton. Engineered by Southern Gothic Media and Rachel Boyd. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.